Ah, Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant.
Whoa, that's refreshing.
And a 9.5 plus pH for every way you move.
I did take a Spain class today.
Restoring like a pro. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This is the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello, and welcome back to Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I'm so happy to welcome back again Sylvia Barbara Soberton. Welcome back, Sylvia.
Well, hello there, Rebecca and everyone. It's great to be here.
I love having you back on the show because I feel like we can talk about pretty much anything, can't we?
Well, thank you. I love being here. Thank you for having me.
You are just like a wealth of knowledge. You have such vast research experience in different things. And I never know what we're going to talk about. I always feel like, hey, do you want to come on the show? And then we kind of go back and forth and whatever, you always end up with like the perfect topic. And, you know, today is one of those, I think, because as much as people love to hate her, they also love her. We're going to talk about Anne Boleyn again and common myths and misconceptions about her. Mm-hmm. So if you're a diehard Anne Boleyn fan, this episode is for you. If you're not a diehard Anne Boleyn fan, maybe you should just listen and you might learn something new today, right?
Right. I think Anne Boleyn is, people think they know her. And when it comes to the traditional narrative, there are a lot of things that can be questioned. And there are a lot of things to be discovered anew. And I'm here to just help you discover Anne Boleyn from the beginning and maybe shed some new light on her life and death as well. So let's dive in.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so what to you is the biggest myth or misconception about Anne?
You know what? I've put on a list here of there are like 3 categories of myths about Anne Boleyn. So I have myths about her early life, myths about her appearance, and myths about her rise and fall. And I think it's best that we go chronologically. So from the beginning, we address each myth and we discuss it as we go.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Let's do it. Okay, so from the beginning.
So the first myth, which is a little bit of a bore, is that she was of low birth. Now, I don't know if a lot of people still believe that she was of low birth, humble origins. But it's one of those myths that kind of stuck to her throughout the centuries, I guess. But let me just tell you that she wasn't. She was born a great lady. She was the daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn. When Henry VIII started courting Anne Boleyn, she was only a daughter of a knight. Her father wasn't yet an earl, but she was a great-granddaughter of the Earl of Ormond, so the Irish peerage. Now, on her mother's side, she was related to the Dukes of Norfolk. And when Henry Percy was courting Anne, he actually defended her parentage, saying that although she is but a simple maid on her father's side, because she has only knight for a father, from her mother's side, she comes from a Norfolk blood, which was a reference to the Dukes of Norfolk in her family. So she was born a great lady. She was born into wealth and privilege. And I think that's important when considering what happened to her later in life, because she had an excellent opportunities for education secured by her father. And we are getting to the second myth, which is that she was the best educated woman in Tudor England. Now, I've heard this and seen this so many times. There's even a recent book where it says, the author says that Anne was one of the most educated women in the aristocracy of Europe, which I don't think is the case with her at all. She was uniquely educated in that sense that she served as a maid of honor at the courts of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, and then at the court of Claude of Valois from 1514 to 1521. So she served about 7 years as a maid of honor in France. Now, the French court was considered a hotbed of flirtation, but it was also a place where Anne learned the French language, where she studied music and literature, and where she came to know all about the religious reform. Now, Anne spoke fluent French, but she didn't know any other languages. When she became queen, she famously bemoaned her ignorance of the Latin tongue, probably because she wasn't schooled in it as a child. But this isn't really surprising, because the great English ladies like Henry VII's mother and wife were also not fluent in Latin. Anne was educated to serve at court and become a pleasing companion to the queen. She sang, she danced, played the lute and harpsichord. She read the Bible and advocated for it to be available for people of England in their vernacular tongue. And she also read widely, usually in French, about religious debates. So her education was exceptional in that sense that she was educated abroad, serving as a maid of honor in the Netherlands and in France, but not exceptional in terms of the skills that she learned. And if we compare her education, let's say, to the education of Sir Thomas More's daughters, they were so much better educated than Anne. They knew Latin, Greek, Hebrew, not only French. For example, Margaret More, Sir Thomas More's daughter, eldest daughter, translated Erasmus's works. She basically corresponded even with Erasmus. But that's not surprising, isn't it? Because she was the daughter of Sir Thomas More, and he was a scholar, a thinker, a humanist, and so on. It's interesting that Sir Thomas More, he had 4 daughters and 1 son, and he noticed that the girls were as intelligent and as capable of learning as boys were. And so all of his children were taught to read and write in English from the young age, and their tutor, John Clement, instructed them in Latin and Greek. They were also taught theology, philosophy, logic, astronomy, mathematics. And Thomas greatly respected women's intelligence and encouraged his children's tutor not to differentiate between them on the basis of sex. His view was that through attaining this great education, women could achieve greater closeness to God. So that's one of the very interesting aspects of life if you were a Tudor noblewoman, I guess.
I think this is so interesting because as you were talking about Anne Boleyn's, let's say, her low birth and then her education, I feel like there's so much of this that pertains to court at the time too. Because if we look when Anne came around, there was the battle between her and Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon is known to come from a royal Spanish family. She was well educated. So the idea is to make Anne look bad, right? She's from low birth. But then she's sandwiched on the other side by Jane Seymour, who was of much lower birth than Anne Boleyn and Catherine of Aragon, and much less educated as well.
Yes, in terms of Henry VIII's wives, if we compare Anne to Catherine of Aragon, well, Catherine was born to be queen consort. And so her parents, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, took really great care of their daughter's education. And Catherine was said to have this really humanist education. For example, Erasmus said that she was miraculously learned for a woman, and wrote that the queen loves good literature, which she has studied with success since childhood. She also read the Bible. She spoke several languages. So other than her native Castilian, she spoke Spanish, Flemish, French, and English. So that's impressive.
Yeah.
But she was born to be queen. And Anne Boleyn was born to be a servant at court, to be a maid of honor and then lady in waiting, to be a great lady as well, because she was raised in the expectation of a good marriage. She couldn't have envisaged that she would become Henry VIII's wife and queen, but still, for example, she was courted by Henry Percy, the heir of the Earl of Northumberland, so she could have become the Countess of Northumberland. So a great marriage was definitely a prospect for her.
She definitely had a lot of advantages having gone to Europe, because I would say most women of her stature would have stayed in England and been a maid in the household of a noble lady instead.
Yes, exactly. And Anne was able to go first to the Netherlands and then into France because of her father. He was a diplomat, he was an ambassador, he was well educated, eloquent. For example, Margaret of Austria really liked him because he could crack jokes and be serious, and they had this really good understanding together. And that's why he was able to secure the position of a maid of honor for one of his daughters. And she was also the granddaughter of the Duke of Norfolk, who in 1514 was really an important person. And he was instrumental, a very important person in the household of Mary Tudor when she was going to France to marry Louis XII as well. So I imagine that Anne being placed, and her sister Mary also as well, placed in the household of Mary Tudor had to do with the Duke of Norfolk and his influence in Mary Tudor's household. So she was very well connected at court, well connected, and she was basically a great lady in the making.
Yeah.
Maybe not a queen in the making. She couldn't have known that or predicted that, but she was a great lady in the making for sure.
Oh, well, it's too bad the way history turned out for her,
Yeah, it is.
but I guess so. We've made it clear now that she was well educated, but not
Yes.
the most well educated woman in Europe.
Yes, definitely not. There were others who were schooled to become great ladies like queens, right? So, but she was still exceptionally well educated for a woman of her station. So the next myth, if we are talking about France, is that she was promiscuous while at the French court. Now, we know that she spent 7 years at the Valois court serving Francis I's wife, Queen Claude. And Francis was known as the lover of female charms from very early in his reign. One contemporary said that he was a great womanizer. Others commented on his whoring. And Henry VIII even heard that Francis was not much attached to his queen. There is this story from Nicholas Sander, who wrote in the 1580s. He was an Englishman in exile. He was a Jesuit. And he wrote this story that Anne was sent to France as a punishment for sexual misconduct. And he said, and I'm going to quote this, he said that at 15, she sinned first with her father's butler and then with his chaplain, and forthwith was sent to France and placed at the expense of the king under the care of a certain nobleman not far from Brie. Now,
Sorry,
that's crazy.
I've never heard that before. That is
you haven't?
insane.
Okay. You know what? Sander was trying to diminish the reputation of Elizabeth I, who was queen at the time. She was a Protestant. And Anne was executed for adultery. So to say that she was promiscuous as a teenager would have stuck probably, because she was, Anne was executed as an adulteress. And to suggest, he was really suggesting that she was promiscuous since her early years. But there is no contemporary documentation, contemporary to Anne's life, that would say that she confirmed what Sander says, that she was this immoral seductress. It's interesting that Anne's most eminent biographer, the late Eric Ives, said that Anne was to stay with Claude for nearly 7 years, a period for which we have no direct evidence, and that's true. So we have to speculate about a lot of things. What Anne have seen at the French court, what she experienced there, and because her stay at the French court is so poorly documented, historical novelists have this creative freedom to imagine and reconstruct her life in diverse and imaginative ways, right? And sometimes, not sometimes, always, this the way she's portrayed in fiction spills over to the realm of nonfiction. And I'm going to show you how. So, for example, we have two novels that shaped Anne Boleyn's reputation. We have Philippa Gregory's The Other Boleyn Girl. For example, we have this scene where Anne catches Jane Seymour on Henry's lap, and she calls her a whore. But then Henry VIII says that, basically says that Anne used French tricks on him during their courtship, which we can imagine what he means by that, right? Hilary Mantel in Bring Up the Bodies is more explicit. It's a novel about the fall of Anne Boleyn as seen through the eyes of Thomas Cromwell. And Anne's sexuality is a recurring theme. On one occasion, there's this scene where Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, Anne's sister-in-law, confides in Cromwell that before Anne married Henry VIII, she used to practice with him in the French fashion. And she says, well, you know what I mean. So again, we have to imagine what she means, but not really, because she elaborates on that, saying that he put his seed otherwise than he should have. Mm-hmm. So Cromwell's conclusion, because it's from Cromwell's point of view, is that Henry regretted these lost opportunities for conceiving a male child with Anne, and there's a scene where Henry says that he thought that Anne was untouched because that was what she told him, that she was a maid, pure and chaste, and that wasn't really the case in the novel. And at least one historian also depicted Anne as sexually experienced, and that she learned that at the French court. But that's just reading too much into, I guess, Sanders' negative portrayal of Anne. That portrayal had very clear goal to depict her as immoral seductress, as evil, because she was mother of Elizabeth I, and he was trying to portray Elizabeth, most of all, as unfit to rule. So to say that Anne that she learned the French tricks at the French court in a sexual way is incorrect. And I'm really surprised that novelists spend so much time busying themselves with Anne's sexuality. But then again, I guess that's part of her story as well, because she refused to have sex with the king. And there are various theories as to why, and was it even the case? Because, Rebecca, the next myth is that, it's not next on my list, but since we're talking about it, I think we should also touch upon it now, that it is often said in the narratives that Henry VIII offered her the role of an official royal mistress, a maîtresse en titre in French. And that's not really the case, because the official royal mistress, the title, didn't really exist in France until later. And there's this brilliant research by Professor Tracy Adams where she makes this point that the word mistress in the 16th century sense didn't mean an extramarital sexual partner, but someone to marry, like a wife. So Henry VIII was not offering Anne to become his mistress, his extramarital sexual partner, but he was trying to make her his wife. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. You talked to Tracy Adams on podcast before, and she explained that beautifully. And there is also a paper. So this really is a research that puts Anne Boleyn in a different light. She's no longer the seductress. She's no longer hard to get, but she refused to be, she didn't want to have sex with the king, and so he wanted to make her his wife and his queen. So that's interesting. The love letters, I guess, if we are talking about it now, this another thing. We are often said, told that that Anne Boleyn and Henry, they didn't have sex. Well, maybe they didn't, but they did engage in intimacies, and we have evidence of that in Henry VIII's love letters, the so-called love letters. I would say those are rather last letters, because
They are.
because sexual longing really underpins the king's letters. For example, in one of them, he says that he wishes himself at this moment privately with you. In another, he basically daydreams about spending an evening in my sweetheart's arms with pretty duckies, and those are breasts, I trust shortly to kiss. And we know that he is not referring to that he would be doing all of this after they marry, but he was writing this letter to her, and he says, well, I'm coming towards you now. And he writes all of those things when he's coming to see her. So they will be exchanging those intimacies when they meet.
Yeah.
That's how we know that they did engage in intimacies. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were dating, really. That's really what it sounds
dating,
like.
Yes, they were dating. But of course, if you look at Anne's situation, then to give herself up completely to him, like body, would mean that she would lose her virginity. And virginity and being chaste meant a lot for women back then. So if she lost that, she would not be attractive on the marriage market again. So that was her, I'm not going to say weapon, but that was her, one of the things that she valued about herself. And a lot of women valued their virginity.
Yeah.
There is this hostile account where Anne basically says to Henry that I've given my maidenhead into my husband's hands, whoever he is. And this has been interpreted by many historians over the years as Anne being, hard to get and playing Henry. But that's not really the case. She's saying, look, I can't trust you completely with my body, with the thing that is most valuable about me. Because she was probably afraid that he would get tired of her and bored quickly. So, and also, sex meant to be for procreation, not only for pleasure. So if she became pregnant out of wedlock, that would be a problem, because Henry VIII argued that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was unlawful, and that he wanted to marry to have children with new wife, because with Catherine of Aragon, God punished them because she was his brother's widow, and so on. Mm-hmm. So Henry VIII really, when he was trying to marry Anne Boleyn, he was not only marrying her because he wanted her, because he was in love with her. He wanted to have children with her, to have sons with her.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. It's the ultimate bundle for an unbelievable price. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. Get it and watch Marvel Television's Ironheart on Disney Plus.
I want to build something iconic.
A new season of The Bear on Hulu.
We can make people happy.
And The Epic, a Minecraft movie on Max.
Anything you can imagine is possible.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. All these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit DisneyPlusHuluMaxBundle.com for details.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit TemptationsTreats.com to learn more.
Yeah.
He needed to have sons with her.
Desperately so.
What's our next myth on the list, Sylvia?
Okay, so we move on from myths about her early life to the myths about her appearance.
Oh yeah, these are the good ones, aren't they?
So we have this myth. Again, Sander is to blame here, because he says that she had a sixth finger on one of her hands and a large one. And you know what? I'm going to quote this from him, because that's just too good not to. Here. So his description of Anne's Eric Ives, for example, said it was a monster, contributed to a monster legend. And Sander described Anne like this. She was rather tall of stature, with black hair and an oval face of a sallow complexion, as if troubled with jaundice. She had a projecting tooth under the upper lip, and on her right hand 6 fingers. There was a large wen under her chin, and therefore to hide its ugliness she wore a high dress covering her throat. In this she was followed by the ladies of the court, who also wore high dresses, having before been in the habit of leaving their necks and the upper portion of their persons uncovered. She was handsome to look at, with a pretty mouth, amusing in her ways, playing well on the lute, and was a good dancer. Now, this is from the English translation that was made in 1877 by David Lewis. But this is not a literal translation of what Sander wrote, because in the original Latin, he stated that Anne had some sort of a swelling under her chin, but what it was exactly, he said he didn't know. David Lewis in 1877 translated Sander's book into English for the first time, because it was in Latin before, and he turned the word turgidum, meaning swelling in Latin, into a large ven. And the word large in relation to the swelling under Anne's chin manifestly doesn't appear in Sander's original. And this error in translation has been perpetuated by Boleyn scholars ever since. For example, Eric Ives criticized Sander for writing that he was not an expert on female attire, and that high necks came into fashion during Elizabeth's period, so after Anne's death. But in his translation, Lewis again made a mistake, because he says that she wore a high dress covering her throat, but the high dress is again his invention, his addition, because in the original Latin text, Sander didn't mention high ruffs, such as were worn during the Elizabethan period. In Latin, he wrote only that Anne was disguising this swelling under her chin by having her neck and chest covered, without mentioning that she did so by using ruffs or high dress. And we know that during Anne's time as queen, women often covered their décolletages with partlets, so they were those decorative coverings for the upper chest and neck. So an error in translation has a lot to do with how we perceive Anne today.
Isn't that, it's so true when it comes to old documents, old writing, to take that and do your own translation and transcription. Because like you said, sometimes when you go back and do that, you realize just the changing of one word can change so much.
Yes, exactly. So I think, to be fair to David Lewis, who was translating Sander into English in the 19th century, that he may have been inspired or influenced by a contemporary record of Anne's coronation. We have this hostile report from an anonymous writer who said that there was some sort of a wart that disfigured her very much, and that she wore a high neck to cover that, and that she has this swelling resembling a goiter. So that's a contemporary hostile account. Now, I've seen that some historians dismiss that because it is so hostile to her. But Sander picks it up later, like much, much later. And I think this is part of the rumors that circulate about Anne when Sander was writing. So can we dismiss that? I think she must have had something swollen beneath her chin. What it was, I'm going to repeat after Sander, I don't know. We are removed 5 centuries from Anne, and unless a portrait resurfaces, we will never know what it was.
Yeah.
But at least 2 people repeated that. One anonymous eyewitness to her coronation, and Sander, who was not an eyewitness, but who was clearly inspired by whatever was circulating about Anne during his lifetime.
Yeah. Well, we always talk about how gossip is based with a little bit of truth. So like you said, there probably was something, some type of swelling, some who knows what was going on with her neck or under her chin,
Yeah,
but they just took it and ran with it and made it worse than it probably actually was.
that's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is another myth is connected to this because one of the myths about Anne is that there is no contemporary portrait of her. But actually, that's not the case because we have a drawing by Hans Holbein, which is inscribed Anne Boleyn Queen. And I think she's hiding, really, Rebecca, in plain sight.
I think it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, because it has been suggested by David Starkey and John Rowlands in the year 1983. So that was before I was even born, Rebecca.
Don't even say that.
And they pointed out that John Chick was identifying the sitters in Hans Holbein's great book. Now, Sir John Chick was a tutor of Edward VI, and he knew most of the people he was identifying. And it's not very likely that he would have misidentified Anne Boleyn because he knew her. He knew her. And his entire career was founded on the Boleyn connection. So how likely would this be that he identified a woman who looked nothing like Anne as her?
Yeah, that's a great point.
But I think a lot of people imagine that Anne was this ravishing beauty. That's another myth, I guess, that she was so beautiful that Henry VIII fell in love with her. But we don't see a lot of praise of Anne Boleyn's appearance from her contemporaries. There are varying documents. One of the ambassadors who has never seen her says, well, Henry VIII is going to marry Anne Boleyn, who is said to be very beautiful. And another person who has never seen her says, well, people say that this Anne Boleyn is very ugly. So we have two polarizing opinions by people who have never seen her.
Yeah.
And and I think that today we like to imagine, like collectively, that she was so beautiful when we have no evidence that she was. And anyway, her charm and her attractiveness, I think, was not in her appearance, but in her wit, in her intelligence. She was different, certainly from Henry VIII's point of view, because she was educated abroad. She spoke fluent French, she wore French fashions, and so on. So she was appealing to Henry VIII on many levels. Beauty, anyway, lies in the eyes of the beholder. So whatever Henry VIII saw in Anne Boleyn, whether she was really beautiful or not, she was attractive to him. That's what mattered, right?
Well, and he clearly was attracted to intelligent women, right? With Catherine of Aragon as the example of the first woman he married. Super intelligent. She was seen as beautiful to most, maybe later, not to as many. But there are definitely similarities between the two women this way.
Definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, this sketch by Hans Holbein, Anne Boleyn Queen, I think she's hiding in plain sight. We just don't want to see her as she is, because I guess we imagine that she must have been like this beauty. And anyway, this is just a sketch. So if we would see a colored version of this, whether it was a painting or intended as a miniature, as has been suggested recently, she would have probably looked a little bit different and maybe more appealing to our eyes, because this is just a sketch. Also, a lot of historians suggest that she's wearing a nightgown in this sketch. I don't think she is wearing a nightgown. I think there is a miniature by Holbein from the mid-1530s of Margaret Roper, Thomas More's daughter. And she's wearing a very similar dress to what the sitter in the Windsor sketch, in this Hans Holbein sketch. Margaret also has this high chemise fastened on her neck. And she's wearing this tippet of fur, I guess it's called, around her shoulders. And I think that's what Anne Boleyn is wearing in the Holbein sketch as well. I don't think it's a nightgown.
Oh, that's so interesting that you compared those two. Now I have to look at both of them side by side and
Yeah,
see.
look at them and tell me what do you think, because there are a lot of similarities between the dresses.
Yeah. Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, I think Anne is not wearing a nightgown at all in this.
Okay, so for those of you that are only listening to this episode, I want you to know there is a video of this episode that we're doing right now, and I have the pictures side by
Yeah.
side so that you can see that these women were dressed very similarly. How excited. I love when, seriously, Sylvia, sometimes you come on the show and you surprise me with this. Like I feel like I've known a decent amount about Anne Boleyn. She was the first Tudor queen that I really did a lot of research on. But then I shifted away, gosh, many, many years ago and started looking at other people. So this is kind of like a good little refresher and update session for me.
Well, that's my intention to show people that there is still so much to learn about Anne and so much to discover about her as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, thank
I'm
you.
glad I surprised you.
So she
Well,
did not
yeah.
have six fingers.
No.
I think we
No,
all
and
know
the
that.
large one, who knows? Sander only said that she had something swollen. And I think, if we are talking about Sander, I think a new translation of his book is needed.
Needed. Yeah.
Or maybe not, because he's, very hostile to Elizabeth and to Anne. So,
Yeah. So my
but
question
just
for
pointing out that, mistranslation crept in there. So,
what's your take on the color of Anne Boleyn's hair?
I think her hair was dark. I think so. I think this is one of the details about Anne's description from Sander that he probably got right. And maybe she wasn't didn't have jet black hair, but dark hair, I think dark hair for certain. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, for certain. I feel like she had a dark hair. I never imagine her with light hair, because we know that, for example, Thomas Wyatt describes her in one of his poems as a brunette, so darker shade of hair.
Okay.
She's never described as a blonde. There is a vague possibility that she was a redhead, or that she had brown hair with reddish tinge to it, because
like
Elizabeth was red hair, but Henry VIII was redhead as well. So
yeah, she could have had auburn hair. My older brother it's brown hair, but it definitely has, when it's in the right sunlight, you can see the red tints to it.
yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Are those the only physical myths about her? There's more?
There's more. There's one more, Rebecca.
Okay. Okay.
Which I've picked, and I think it's going to be interesting to so many of your wonderful listeners. One of the myths, I feel, is that the National Portrait Gallery portrait of Anne is a good indication of her likeness. This is one of those myths that I want to dispel, because this is not a contemporary likeness. It dates to circa 1584. So it dates from Elizabeth's times. And Anne Boleyn's face was a copy of the face of Elizabeth I from the Compton Verney painting. So the National Portrait Gallery portrait, as much as I like it, and it's really iconic because it's everywhere. When you picture Anne Boleyn in your head, I bet you're thinking about the NPG portrait. But it's not a contemporary likeness of her, and her face is modeled on Elizabeth's. It was probably part of someone's corridor portrait collection, because those corridor portraits were very popular during Elizabeth's period, when courtiers wanted to show their reverence to the Queen, and they had portraits of Elizabeth, of Anne Boleyn, of Henry VIII, of every Tudor that there was before Elizabeth, to show their allegiance to the Queen. But this National Portrait Gallery portrait is not a contemporary likeness, and it's definitely not what Anne Boleyn looked like, because her face is basically a copy of Elizabeth's face, and that also had, its own purpose. It's for propaganda purposes, to perhaps depict Anne as this proto-Elizabeth, the first Elizabeth. So it's one of those things that blew my mind when I was researching Anne many years ago, because I noticed that similarity between them, because the brush strokes around the face, like around the mouth and under the nose, under the chin, they are exactly the same. And I always thought to myself, like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Is this face pattern, is Anne's face a pattern from Elizabeth? Is it a direct copy? And
Right.
I think it is.
Well, and it was known that throughout her reign that Elizabeth had a template that was used for her portraits. So it would make sense that one of those templates could be used to create one of her mother. I've always seen the similarities between Elizabeth I's portrait and that Anne Boleyn one that you're talking about. Like, they look so similar. And again, I'll have some side by side here so that you can do some comparison, because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. A lot of people can say that it is a natural likeness between mother and daughter, right? But in this case, there are brush strokes that are running like in the lower part of their faces that are exactly the same. So it's not a coincidence, and it's not just a natural likeness between mother and daughter.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so that was the last one when it came to appearances?
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, that was like a wild ride we just went on.
Yeah. Well, buckle up, because I have more.
I'll put my seatbelt on.
Yeah, put it on. So the third category of myths are the myths about Anne's rise and fall. So about Anne's rise, we always, it's part of the narrative. We hear that she was that she played the role of Perseverance in the Chateau Vert pageant, because that was her debut at the Tudor court. But did she really? Because I found no evidence that she played Perseverance. This is definitely one of those things about the narrative that seems like it's appropriate for her rise, like Eric Ives called the Perseverance like the role of historical appropriateness. But it's interesting that contemporary chronicler Edward Hall listed the roles noblewomen played in the Chateau Vert pageant, but didn't specify who played whom. So he lists beauty, honor, perseverance, kindness, constancy, bounty, mercy, and pity. And there is a list of ladies who undoubtedly participated in this pageant and later received clothing as mementos. And those ladies were named as the French Queen, which is Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, the Countess of Devonshire, Anne Boleyn, Anne's sister Mary, their sister-in-law Jane Parker, Mistress Brown, Mistress Dannet, and a mistress who was not named. And someone has apparently merged those two accounts together, resulting in the assumption that Mary Tudor played beauty, and that Gertrude Courtenay, Countess of Devonshire, played what did she play? Kindness. Sorry, Mary Tudor played. There is a lot of things to keep track of. Yeah. So Mary Tudor, that she played beauty, honor played by Gertrude, perseverance played by Anne Boleyn, and so on. And that's not really the case, because we don't have a contemporary account that would name those women as playing those exact roles. So whereas we know that they certainly took part in this pageant, they didn't play those exact roles. That's also important.
Yeah. Well, we appropriate them where we believe they should fit. And how, how wonderful is it that Anne Boleyn is Perseverance? That just goes with the whole storyline.
Well, I mean, Perseverance, right? Yeah. So that's one of those things that that they you think that this is a part of the story, and when you start to question it, like, where's the source that says so?
It's so important to question things.
Yeah.
You can't just take everything as fact. You
Mm-hmm.
really have to question things. And I think there's just a lot of people out there who this is their entertainment. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do the research. So then it comes back to people like you and me. And I
Mm-hmm.
see it as our duty to get this information
Yeah.
out to those people one way or another.
Well, definitely, yeah. To yeah, it's important to remember, to understand, to know that those people that we talk about, so Anne Boleyn and others from that period, they were real people, right?
Mhm.
So we owe it to them to tell their story right. And I always felt very strongly about Anne because she was how I became a Tudor historian. I think she's everyone's gateway drug to the Tudors. People are so fascinated with Anne Boleyn, and they start to research other people, and they broaden their scope. But yeah, she's the starting point for so many people, and it's easy to just repeat what we know without questioning it.
Mhm.
But questioning is very important, because if you look at what was known about Anne Boleyn like 30 years ago and what we know now, how many new theories are proposed, how many myths are debunked. It's crazy. So it's
Yes.
a very good time to be a historian, Tudor historian, because we have access to this amazing research, to amazing documents at our fingertips, basically.
Mhm.
So it's great.
Yeah. And honestly, anybody can do their own research. If you're reading a book and the book has sources or it has footnotes, look at those. If you're questioning what the author is writing about, look at the source that they used. Go back and read it yourself. You can make your own decision. But I think all too often, and I hate to say this, social media has given people this freedom to just say somebody is wrong without having any evidence to say why they think that they're
Yeah,
wrong.
exactly. Yes.
And that's too bad, because I think we all just need to do our own research. Don't accuse somebody of being a terrible researcher. They don't know what they're talking about unless you're going to have some evidence. I think
Yeah.
most academics, researchers, and historians out there are willing to have a discussion, a civil
Yeah.
discussion about their
Well,
research.
it's important because discussion is how we reach certain conclusions,
Yes.
right? And there can be, we are reading the same sources, right?
Hmm.
But the theories can be different.
Yeah.
The opinions can be different. And it's okay. It's okay to have, different varying opinions. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What's the next myth that we got on the list here?
Okay, so another myth that I have is that she used the Semper Idem as her motto. Now, this is quite recent. I always wanted to get to the bottom of this because I've seen it as part of the narrative when it comes to Elizabeth I and Anne Boleyn, that Elizabeth frequently used the Semper Idem motto. That's a fact, and it means always the same. And it's stated so often by various historians that she used this motto as a tribute to her executed mother, that she inherited it from Anne. But I haven't seen any evidence, any contemporary evidence that Anne used this motto. And when it comes to Elizabeth, Edward Hall, sorry, not Edward Hall, William Camden, who was Elizabeth's biographer, he said that she used this motto throughout her entire life to justify her actions, that she wanted to underline that she was in policy, in religion, that she was always the same, Semper Idem. So it didn't have origin with Anne Boleyn, but with Elizabeth's willingness to highlight that she as queen was always the same.
Yeah.
So that's one of those, I think, major things about Anne Boleyn, because I see it all the time in even in academic books that she used this Semper Idem, always the same, and yet I've never seen this in contemporary sources. Now, I wrote about this in more detail in my Substack page, so I'm going to give you a link and you can dive into it if you want. because I have so much more detailed in there, where I dive into how do we know who's the first source, who's, and so on. So you can dive into that. But suffice it to say that Anne Boleyn probably didn't use the Semper Idem motto. I have never seen it in relation to Anne in any contemporary document.
It was more of just propaganda for Elizabeth to get that message out there.
Yeah, it was, and it likely originated with Elizabeth.
Okay.
Because she had her own, goal in it, her own purpose.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. What's next? These are fun. I feel like I'm learning some new things.
So much fun. Yeah, so another myth when it comes to Anne Boleyn's rise and fall, more about her fall, I guess, is that Anne Gainsford was George Wyatt's informant. Now, George Wyatt wrote the first ever biography of Anne, entitled The Life of the Virtuous, Christian and Renowned Queen Anne Boleyn. It was in the early 17th century. Now, George was the grandson of poet Thomas Wyatt, who is believed to have had a romantic interest in Anne Boleyn before she caught Henry VIII's eye. Now, Wyatt claimed that his informants were two women, of whom one served as Anne's lady-in-waiting. Now, Samuel Weller Singer in the 19th century, who was an editor of Wyatt's work, identified the lady from Anne's household as Anne Gainsford, as this informant. And historians accepted this erroneous identification of a maid called Nan, because there is a maid called Nan that appears in George Wyatt's narrative. And I guess Weller Singer went, oh, that's probably Anne Gainsford. And again, I'm going to have to refer to what Eric Ives said, that given such links, the volume of material Wyatt recorded is disappointing, because it is. We would expect so much more from a lady-in-waiting who served Anne, so many more details about Anne's life, maybe her appearance and so on. And it's really disappointing what Wyatt has there. Now, Weller Singer was wrong in his identification, because Anne Gainsford died before George Wyatt was even born. And how do we know that? We know that because George Zush, Gainsford's husband, made his last will in 1548, and he referred to his wife Ellen, now my well-beloved wife. So, Anne Gainsford couldn't have been Wyatt's informant, because she was dead before he was even born.
There you go. There's that important research that you have to do.
Yeah, never rely on the 19th century translations or identifications, because they are very often wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And to be maybe fair to Weller Singer, that around the same time as he was editing his work of Wyatt, another work was published. It was John Fox's Book of the Martyrs. And in this book, there are reminiscences of one John Luth, Archdeacon of Nottingham, who included Anne Gainsford. He named her Anne Gainsford as one of the ladies who read William Tyndale's The Obedience of a Christian Man. And I think that's how Weller Singer got the name, because Anne Gainsford's name was already out there in print, and she was one of Anne's ladies, and she was documented in this Book of Martyrs. And so Weller Singer probably was inspired or influenced by that. But as we've said, Anne Gainsford couldn't have been George Wyatt's informant, because she died before he was born. So unless she was a ghost.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
Well, that's perfect for a fiction tale, isn't it?
It is. It actually is. Yeah.
Oh, this journey is crazy that you're taking me on. How many more myths or misconceptions do we have left?
I'm just going to leave some of them out because
Okay.
we are running out of time, Rebecca.
Yes.
So how about if I'm just going to tell you one more and that's
Okay,
it?
perfect. Make it a good one.
All right.
No
So
pressure.
this is a very good one. Oh,
Okay.
this is a perfect one. So there is this in the narratives of Anne Boleyn's rise and fall. There is this information that she was served in the Tower of London by a lady who is only known as Mistress Orchard, and she appears in both fiction and non-fiction about Anne's downfall. She was supposedly her old nurse, so a governess who presided over the nursery when Anne was a child. Now, she apparently there is this secondary account where it says that Mrs. Orchard shrieked out dreadfully when the guilty sentence was read aloud, when Anne was sentenced to die during her trial. And that's not really the case, because we have Charles Risley, the Windsor Herald, who tells us that the two ladies who attended Anne Boleyn during her trial were Lady Kingston, the constable's wife, and Lady Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's aunt. So he mentions no such thing as Mistress Orchard shrieking out dreadfully. I think if this was the case, it would have been well documented. Now, also William Kingston, whose letters are our main source for Anne's time in the Tower towards the end of her life, he doesn't mention Mistress Orchard at all. And so having established that none of the contemporary sources that I know of mention Mistress Orchard, I've decided to search which one from the secondary sources, which is the first reference to her, and listen what I found.
Ooh.
I found a mention of her in Hubert Burke's Historical Portraits of the Tudor Dynasty and the Reformation period. Now, he wrote History of the Tudors in several volumes. He was a very prolific writer. And what's funny is that he had this penchant, I guess, for imagining things, for making things up. And he passed them off as facts. And he included no sources. So it's almost impossible to read it, like to find what he's saying about.
Yeah.
But an interesting thing is that one of the critics who criticized his books said that, and I quote, his writing of history very closely approaches the grotesque, which is true. And that he says that this is the worst example for any serious student of history. And if Burke's contemporaries were wary of his writing, so should we be as well. And he is the first and probably also the only book that includes Mistress Orchard in the 19th century as Anne Boleyn's attendant in the Tower. So this is one of those myths that really blew my mind when I was looking for it, because I was sure that there was a Mistress Orchard.
Yeah.
Because why would you imagine? Why would you make this up? And historians in our day, also repeated this without looking at the sources. So I'm fairly confident that this Mistress Orchard didn't exist.
Amazing. Amazing. And
that was also a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a good. There's been a lot of good ones. I think I'm kind of surprised because when we talked about doing an episode on myths and misconceptions, I thought, is it going to be all the same old stuff that we've already heard?
I knew you would say so, and I knew that the listeners probably in the beginning when we talked about it, that they would be like, oh no, I almost heard people yawning and saying, oh, not again. But hopefully we presented some new things, new insights, new discoveries in an interesting way, so that you see that there's still a lot of work when it comes to Anne Boleyn.
Yeah.
A lot of things to uncover, still a lot of things to discuss, to debate, to reevaluate, returning to the old documents and, for example, retranslating them.
Which we've discussed is so important, haven't we?
Yeah. So I'm very glad that I surprised you, Rebecca, because I know that you hate being bored.
I like to talk about new things, and
I know, me too.
And Anne Boleyn is one of those things, like, you know, the old phrase, it's like beating a dead horse. It's the same thing over and over. But it's, you know, like today I feel like I learned something about her that I did not know before. I learned several things about her, and I hope that the people that are listening or watching the video feel like they have taken away something that they didn't know before today. Because Sylvia, I've enjoyed this episode. I enjoy the research. I enjoy the research.
That I can talk about Anne Boleyn for hours on end.
Yes.
She's my favorite. I love her. I adore her.
Well, I can listen to you for hours on end, talk about her.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is you are not afraid to give credit to the people who discovered some of these things.
Yeah.
You know, I love that. I love that you brought up Tracy Adams, because as you were talking about the mistress
she's also
thing,
my very dear friend. So I know her personally. She's great. So
she is.
It's only natural.
That's right. Well, Sylvia Barbara Soberton, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rebecca.
And for those of you who are not aware, Sylvia has written several books. I'm going to include some links. I'm not going to make you promote it all again. I feel like you've been on the show enough that everybody knows. They can go
do promote me, please. Feel free.
She really, I would say Sylvia is one of those prolific writers who she puts out a lot of content, a lot of printed content, but she also writes a lot of articles. She really spends a lot of time in the 16th century. And I want to support her. I want other people to get involved in her work. Her books are all available on Amazon. If you like Amazon, I'm pretty sure you can find them anywhere else too, right?
Yes, as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for promoting me. It's one of those things when you write a book and then it's out there, and it's always such a great feeling to know that people are reading it and enjoying it. So, thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Until next time.
Until next time, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tudorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.